Hi guys, happy full moon in Scorpio. I'm here to talk about Scorpio energy and also Taurus energy, as the Scorpio full moon is reflecting the Taurus sun at the moment, this polarity, this axis, and what the Scorpio archetype means for us and how we can embody it in our lives and flow with this phase of the moon. So thanks for joining me. Before we dive into Scorpio energy, I do want to talk about what the full moon really means. And I love full moons. I was born on a full moon. Energy feels really good for me. It feels natural and normal. That being said, Scorpio, with the Scorpio energy, I always want to feel my way through it. Talking about it feels kind of uncomfortable because this water archetype energy, I want to be able to feel my way through things rather than talk about them. So this is a little bit of a challenge for me, but I hope that you can get something out of it. When we talked about the new moon last week, we were talking about really bringing in and embodying and planting the seeds for how we want to embrace that new moon archetype. This week with the full moon, we talk about culminations, kind of the height and the peak of things, and then as we head towards the new moon again, we're talking about release, surrender, letting go. And with Scorpio in particular, we're talking about surrendering shadows, all these shadow aspects that keep us from embodying our fullest self and our fullest power and our fullest purpose. But I'll get back to more of that later. So with this cycle, we plant the seeds on the new moon, and then at the full moon we see the culmination of it. And a lot of people talk about release and surrender and removing these blockages or barriers that keep us from what we want to manifest with the next new moon cycle, which will happen for Scorpio in another 6 months. But for me, as much as it is about releasing blocks and barriers, it's also about giving thanks and celebrating the energy of that archetype that exists within us and how we've brought it into our lives and embodied it deeply within ourselves in the past 6 months. So I invite you either to pause the video now or to go back afterward and just think about where you were 6 months ago. So November 20th-ish, 2020, whatever you were doing or focusing on or embracing, I invite you to look back at that part of your life and what were you thinking about? What were you hoping about? What did you want to plant the seeds for back then? And now with the Scorpio full moon, we should see the culmination of that. And if things haven't kind of come to fruition the way that you were hoping, now is a good time to look at what has kept us from bringing that energy fully into our lives, or maybe manifesting it fully into reality, what we can release to take those steps, especially in the next 6 months when the new moon in Scorpio occurs. Well, what can we release so that we can prepare for that moment, for bringing in this new cycle of Scorpio, this new cycle of the alchemist archetype? So in terms of celebrating Scorpio is power. It's intensity, it's transformation, it's transmutation, it's taking this process of death and bringing rebirth. Especially with the full moon, we're sort of seeing the culmination, so we're heading towards that death aspect. What can we let die in order to bring in new life? It's embracing this cycle that we have to go through. Being a fixed sign, so Scorpio is always digging deeper. It's wanting to go into those shadows. It's wanting to see ourselves in its fullest light, right? In this full moon energy, this full moon phase, this full moon illumination. The Scorpio new moon's looking into these shadows, knowing what we want to go in and dig up and kind of stir the murky waters on the bottom of the pond, right? So that we can see what's down there and we can use it to transform and transmute and create anew. And the Scorpio full moon is really bringing those shadows to light so that we know what we're working with and we know what it is we want to embrace and to love and to transform about ourselves. Scorpio is all about being vulnerable and being authentic, and these might feel uncomfortable, or especially in the case of vulnerability, it might even feel like a weakness. But that Scorpio's gift to us in its highest form is teaching us that vulnerability is actually a strength. Because when we know deeply who we are and everything about us, we can use it to fuel our lives, to fuel change, to fuel creation, to fuel growth, rather than it being something that makes us weak or makes us vulnerable, takes away our power. Really, vulnerability is our strength and our power, rather than it being our weakness or source of disempowerment. So that's the high side of Scorpio. That's what it teaches us. The shadow aspect would be anything that keeps us from feeling vulnerable. If you are uncomfortable with feeling vulnerable and sitting in your fullest power, or you feel that your fullest power is portraying some sort of sense of inauthenticity, why is that? The Scorpio full moon is asking us to illuminate, to look at those shadows of what keeps us from being our fullest, deepest, authentic selves, what keeps us feeling vulnerable when we are our authentic selves, and why we feel vulnerable in standing in our own power, our own truest power, rather than putting on the guise of somebody else in order to be powerful, or some other sense of self in order to be powerful. And this can be kind of a challenging and vulnerable thing. For me, how the Scorpio energy has kind of played out in my sense of self, in my life, and my self-worth, is embracing a self-truth, a personal truth, that for me, vulnerability is only a weakness when I don't understand that part of myself. So I can share hurts, share struggles, share challenges, because they're a source of strength and a source of power. And the only times in which they are a weakness, a soft spot, something that somebody else could use against me, per se, is when I don't know them for myself. If I can sit and be present with myself in times of feeling vulnerable, then it becomes my strength. But if I feel vulnerable and I put up all these barriers and I put up these walls and I try to guard myself and protect myself from this feeling of vulnerability, or from others using that feeling of vulnerability, then it becomes a weakness. But when I sit with that feeling of vulnerability and I know the process that I'm going through and these shadows that I'm uncovering and bringing to light and working through and moving through, it becomes a sense of strength and a sense of empowerment, and it's how I know my own worth. So I'll share a personal story. Recently, I had a situation in which I was reminded of one of my biggest triggers, particularly in relationships, of feeling like when I get overwhelmed or I have a lot of emotion come up, that it's too much, right? And I've seen that. So I've seen that happen for me multiple times, where I get really deep and entrenched in an emotion. I'm reactive in that moment and I feel it and I want to talk about it and move through it and work through it. But the other person, it's too much for them. It makes them feel uncomfortable, might make them feel vulnerable or scared or out of touch with their own feelings, and want to avoid that in the future. So they might be able to sit and be present with me in that moment, but it's only to move through things so that we don't go back there again, so that my emotions aren't aroused, so I'm not in that sort of intense and powerfully emotional state again, because it's too much for some people. And the power of Scorpio has really taught me, one, that I'm not too much, that this feeling of being too much is also a feeling of being not enough. And Scorpio, by embracing this archetype within me, I can know my own self-worth, right? I'm reflecting that Taurus energy of self-worth, and I know that I am enough. But more so it's a surrender and it's a trust into this process of transmutation, into knowing that all hurt that comes to me can be healed, that everything I've experienced in my life might not fully be eradicated or fully go away, but these challenges and struggles and hurts that I've experienced, I can heal them. And what this full moon for me is really asking is that I surrender to this, and I trust that anything that comes to me can be healed. So in this example of relationships, if it is that I become in my emotional state too much for somebody, it's trusting that if I know for myself that I am enough, that I will have that reflected to me, that I am enough. But the power of Scorpio is knowing that if we sit in our deepest strengths, our deepest authenticity, that's our source of power. And it's a very intense sign. It's a lot. So again, if talking about it or journaling about it doesn't feel comfortable, I invite you to just sit and feel through it. And of course, because it is reflecting the Taurus sun, spend some time outside, out in nature, grounding into this earth, and just feeling the earth beneath your feet, the wind on your face, all of that sort of sensual, sensatory energy, sensatory experience is what will help us embrace our shadows, see our shadows, allow them to come to light, and let them pass. So a couple of things. Because we are in the Scorpio full moon rather than the Scorpio new moon, we are not necessarily planting the new seeds for Scorpio energy to come into our lives. We are celebrating how we have embodied and embraced Scorpio. So that part of your life where you do go deep and use your deepest, vulnerable, authentic sense of self to empower you and allow you to show up fully in this life, in who you are. At the same time, if you feel that you've struggled with this process of looking at your own shadows, of digging up the murky water, of allowing things to be a little bit cloudy before they become clear again, in order to see what's there and to fully embrace and go deep within yourself, this is the time to ask, what is keeping you from that? What is blocking you? What are you afraid of in this process? What keeps you from wanting to be fully authentic and fully in yourself and fully know who you are and how to use those different elements of yourself to create power rather than to feel weakness? So when we talk about the full moon of Scorpio reflecting this light of Taurus, we're really asking ourselves, how do we transmute our shadows so that we feel comfortable and secure within ourselves? How do we transmute energy? How do we see our shadow selves, our shadow sides, so that we feel comfortable in our own bodies, so that we can embody fully who we are and have a sense of presence and peacefulness about it too? We can also see it kind of from the flip side. So how can we be present and peaceful and secure within our bodies, within ourselves, in order to go into our shadow sides, go deep into who we are, and begin to do that really vital, deep, important, sometimes scary shadow work that brings us to our deepest and authentic selves. And in this way, we move from the Aries Libra energy of knowing who we are in relationship to ourselves and to others, to valuing who we are. The Taurus energy asks what our body needs and how we can preserve our sense of self and our physical being in this world. And the Scorpio energy asks what we can transmute, what we can change, how we can go deeper psychologically and emotionally in order to shift. So with this full moon in Scorpio, we're really being asked to surrender any mistrust we have in ourselves in this process. Surrender mistrust in these parts of ourselves that we see as a weakness, as something that's too much maybe or not enough. And how can we trust that our deepest sense of power, our deepest source of authority, is actually our authentic and most vulnerable sense of self? Okay, so if you're still with me, if you got through all of that, I am going to pull a card for us again so that we can get a little bit more clarity about how we want to look into ourselves and see how we've embraced our shadow selves, see how we've gone through this process of alchemizing the different shadow elements of ourselves to bring out our authentic and deep source of power, or maybe how we haven't. So how we can give gratitude for it, or how we can release these blocks that keep us from it, and in the next 6 months really open ourselves up to being able to go deep within and access that source of power. All right, so if you are sitting, we'll ground down into the earth. Feel free to close your eyes and we'll take a deep breath in. And exhale, release. So I got the Judge. So the key words of the Judge are inner critic, group speak, finding fault, restriction coming from inside or outside, or both. It can also be careful thought, precision, discrimination, and wise perception. Sometimes you continue with old paths even when your heart tells you not to. You may be staying on a path because it is the only one you know. Out of fear, you dare not to think of yourself as anything but a daughter, son, partner, father, mother, executive, housewife, or student. Fears of new roles, financial insecurity, and even closed-mindedness to new experiences keep you from significantly changing and living your dreaming body into the world. You feel obliged both to yourself and to others to maintain the personal history that you've created. Personal history is a prison that you seem to have created for yourself. Arnie Mindell. So I love this quote that's included with this card because it's really asking us to release sort of the shadow sides of Taurus too, of the other side of this polarity, where we feel stuck in that sort of persevering story, maybe one that gives us a sense of security, of comfort, but is asking us instead to go deeper. It's asking us to kind of let go of these trappings that keep us stuck, even if we do feel secure and comfortable within them, so that we can know who authentically we are, our depths of our being, because that's how we truly live from our power and how we truly bring in abundance and security, is when we know who we are. When you pull the Judge card, you are being asked to reflect on the voices speaking inside and outside of you. Notice in yourself the energy of devaluing your worth or the energy of recognizing your power. Do you speak your truth with discrimination? The inner critic does not permit experimentation or invention, but wants life to proceed along a habitual, clearly marked path. The discriminator, on the other hand, is capable of balancing value and risk and choosing a way that is nourishing and growth-promoting, even if risky. It can feel really terrifying to do the shadow work, to look inside, to be vulnerable. But in a way, doing this shadow work and doing the deep transformation does provide nourishment and growth, even if it does feel uncomfortable. The challenge is to transform the inner critic from one who clouds awareness with self-doubt to one who assists awareness through the process of awakening, continuing to adulthood and to self-discrimination. So we transform our deepest sense of self from one that is ego-based, that, of course, Aries, that tells us who we are and keeps us stuck in that, to to really the shepherd that can lead us inward, that can take us to our deepest knowing, our deepest authenticity, and therefore our deepest power. So I love that. It really is asking us, how do we keep ourselves stuck, and how do we sort of fall back on this sense of security in these ideas or these stories of who we are that maybe don't actually reflect our deepest authentic selves. So how can we release and let go of these? And like I said before, because we are reflecting the Taurus energy, the one that in its shadow side does keep us are stuck, or limits ourselves to these certain ideas of who we should be in order to be worthy. We can embrace the sort of high aspect of Taurus in order to reach that deeper Scorpio side. So going out into nature and feeling ourselves and our bodies in our most basic senses and sense perceptions. I think also that meditating can really help us with this message that we've gotten in being still and allowing for awareness without judgment. So in meditation, we sit quietly and we notice when thoughts come through, or when certain senses are aroused, like maybe we hear something or smell something. And what we do in meditation is, instead of attaching to these things, we notice them with mindfulness, and then we let them go. So unattachment. And we can do this with our sense of self too, our notions of self. We can notice these stories that we're telling us, but we can choose, instead of embracing them, to unattach from them, and not to judge, not to criticize, not to put ourselves down for embracing these stories or for partaking in them, but simply noticing, simply being aware and letting them go. And that doesn't necessarily mean divorcing ourselves from our sense of self, but simply to allow us to notice what it is or who it is that we are, and that we truly and deeply want, and who or what it is that we've sort of taken on because it provides us a sense of security, but keeps us small and keeps us limited and keeps us surface level rather than going deep, which is what Scorpio asks us to do, and the Scorpio archetype that exists within us wants to do. Awesome. So thanks for listening today. Thanks for being with me. I hope you enjoyed this and it gave you something to think about or to love and embrace and celebrate within yourself. And I will come back in a couple of weeks with the new moon, and this card and this message has inspired me to post more about meditation and how we can use that as a tool. So hopefully I will be able to do that soon. But thanks for joining me, and I hope you have a lovely full moon in Scorpio. I will see you at the new moon in Taurus. Bye.